They found her body wedged between the mattress and the box spring. Not just murdered, but hidden, compressed, as if her existence needed to be erased. And a few steps away, 2 children. One barely old enough to walk. The other still holding on to her favorite toy. Both lifeless. Both strangled. Both tucked away inside a utility closet, like discarded trash. But the horror didn't end there. Because what investigators uncovered next would uncover a man with a history of death, sexual violence, and a trail of lies going back decades. And here's the real punch in the gut. He'd just gotten out of prison. Early. On parole. 5 months later, 3 people were dead. Heather Jackson. Her 3-year-old daughter, Selena. Her 18-month-old son, Wayne Jr. And yet, this wasn't random. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. This was something planned. Calculated. And far more disturbing than anyone in Sandusky could have imagined. Because you don't get to this level of depravity overnight. This man, Curtis Clinton, had already killed before. He already knew what it felt like to take a life. And still, they let him out. They let him walk free. Right into the lives of 3 people who never saw it coming. But, the question that still haunts this case isn't just why he did it. It's how he got away with it for so long. How many red flags were missed? And how many more victims there could have been, had he not been caught when he was. So stay with me. Because over the next hour, we're going to peel back every single layer of this case. We'll walk you through the crime scene. The forensics. The lies he told the police. And the brutal truth about his past that should have kept him behind bars forever. But it didn't. And the consequences were fatal. Before we begin, make sure you subscribe to this channel right now to complete our first 1,000 subscribers. Like the video if you believe victims deserve to be remembered, not forgotten. And drop a comment below. Do you believe in second chances for convicted killers? Or should some people never be released? Let's get into it. Because what you're about to hear isn't just a story about a killer. It's a story about failure. And the lives it stole. It was just past midnight when the first officer stepped through the door. The air inside the house was wrong. Heavy. Still. Like the walls themselves had witnessed something they could never speak about. The call had come from Heather's brother. He hadn't heard from her all day. Texts went unanswered. No one picked up the phone. And Heather wasn't the type to just go silent. Not when her kids were around. Not when she had promised to stop by earlier that afternoon. So he did what any worried sibling would do. He drove over. Knocked. Waited. No answer. Just quiet. That too deep kind of quiet that makes your stomach twist before your brain catches up. He got inside the house. And what he saw was enough to stop him cold. Heather's body, just 23 years old. Crushed between the bed and box spring like an afterthought. Bruises around her neck. Rope impressions. Signs of a struggle. But it was the next discovery that would cause the most damage. Because her children, tiny, innocent, defenseless, were locked inside a closet. Strangled. Folded. Gone. The responding officers, trained, seasoned, used to seeing the worst humanity had to offer. They had to step outside. Some turned away. Others wept. You don't get used to that. You're not supposed to. And while the scene alone was enough to trigger shockwaves across Sandusky, there was one detail that made this case spiral even deeper into the realm of unthinkable. Heather had been sexually assaulted. But not just her. Investigators found strong forensic evidence suggesting one of the children had been sexually violated as well. That level of depravity isn't just rare. It's revolting. And for seasoned homicide detectives, it meant one thing. This wasn't about rage. This wasn't spontaneous. This was about control. Power. A man acting out something he had likely fantasized about, rehearsed, long before this night. So who was he? Who could do something like this? That answer came faster than anyone expected. Because this wasn't some faceless predator. This wasn't a stranger lurking in the shadows. This was someone Heather knew. Someone she trusted. A man named Curtis Clinton. She had met him just a few weeks earlier. He helped her move into her new place. She introduced him to her kids. Let him into her life. And why wouldn't she? He seemed nice enough. Polite. Charming. Helpful. But behind that smile was a man carrying a record soaked in violence. A past so dark, it should have barred him from being anywhere near a single mother. Or her children. But no system stopped him. No red flags were waved in time. And just 5 months after his release from prison, Curtis Clinton killed 3 people. Now pause here. Because it's not just what he did that chills the blood. It's who he was before. And how he got the chance to do it all over again. This wasn't his first time ending a life. And soon, police would start to realize they were dealing with a repeat killer. A man who'd already been given a second chance. And blew it, in the most horrific way possible. But before we go into the full depths of Curtis Clinton's past, let's talk about what happened next. Because once he realized the police were closing in, he didn't run. He didn't hide. He inserted himself into the investigation. Bold. Confident. Almost like he wanted to get caught. Or worse. Thought he wouldn't be. But how he behaved after the murders. That's when the psychological layers start to peel away. Because it turns out, Curtis Clinton wasn't just dangerous. He was calculating. He was manipulative. And he had a plan. A plan that involved telling stories. Twisting timelines. And even claiming the children were alive when he left the house. But it was too late. The evidence was mounting. The rope. The DNA. The lies unraveling faster than he could patch them. Still, there was one more trick up his sleeve. A desperate attempt to turn the tables and escape what was coming. But we'll get to that. Because before justice came knocking, there were more revelations. More buried truths. And one jaw-dropping detail about his past that makes you wonder. How many more Heather Jacksons are out there? How many more lives did this man impact, before he was finally stopped? That's next. Stay with me. Before Heather Jackson ever met Curtis Clinton. Before she let him into her home. Before she ever imagined that evil could wear such a calm, courteous face. He had already killed someone. You see, the Curtis Clinton that Heather trusted wasn't just a recently released ex-con. He was a convicted killer. And what's worse, he'd been out before. He'd already tasted freedom after taking a life. And now, for the second time, he had stolen lives again. But let's rewind, because understanding who Curtis Clinton really was requires going back more than a decade. It was 1997. Curtis was in his early 20s. He wasn't known as a monster back then. Not yet. But he was violent. Possessive. Controlling. And when 18-year-old Misty Keckler tried to break up with him, that's when things turned deadly. He strangled her. No elaborate plan. No drawn-out manipulation. Just rage. Pure, fast, and final. And after the killing, he didn't run. He dumped her body. Then went home. And told police what he'd done. That part's important. Because this is a man who, even in his early crimes, displayed a disturbing calm after violence. Almost like it didn't faze him. Almost like it was just another part of his day. Curtis Clinton was sentenced to 10 to 25 years in prison for that murder. But here's the part that makes your blood run cold. He served only 13 years. Then he got out. Early. And instead of being monitored closely, Instead of being treated as the dangerous offender he was allowed to re-enter society with almost no public attention. There was no community bulletin, no widespread media coverage, no alert to the single mother who would later let him help her move. The justice system had forgotten about him. But he hadn't forgotten what he was capable of. And 5 months. Just 5 months after his release, he struck again. Only this time, it wasn't just one victim. And it wasn't just a crime of passion. It was premeditated. It was layered. And it was worse. So when news broke that Curtis Clinton had been arrested for the triple homicide, the shockwave wasn't just about what he'd done. It was about the fact that he was ever let out in the first place. People were furious. Outraged. Sickened. Because how does a man murder someone, get released, and then go on to murder again? This time, a mother and her 2 small children. How many lives could have been spared if that first sentence had meant life? But even after Clinton's arrest, even after his DNA matched the scene, even after he confessed, he didn't stop trying to twist the narrative. Because Curtis had one final card to play. In the days leading up to trial, he changed his story. Suddenly, he wasn't alone that night. Suddenly, there was a mystery man. An unknown figure who was supposedly at the house with him. A scapegoat. A ghost. A lie. He claimed the children were alive when he left. He said someone else must have done it. But the evidence didn't lie. His DNA was everywhere. On Heather. On one of the children. On the rope. On the bed sheets. In the closet. And perhaps most damning, he tried to clean up the scene. He moved bodies. Washed. Rearranged things. Tried to make it look like something else had happened. But you can't clean away intent. You can't scrub the horror out of a crime that brutal. Investigators pieced together the timeline. They matched fibers. They compared injuries. They traced phone records and movements. It all pointed to one thing. Curtis Clinton wasn't just guilty. He was deliberate. He was strategic. And he had taken his time. So when the case went to trial, prosecutors didn't hold back. They laid it all out. The rape. The strangulation. The closet. The attempt to stage the scene. The prior murder conviction. The early release. The lies. And when the jury saw the full picture, they didn't hesitate. It took them just under 3 hours to reach a verdict. Guilty. On all counts. Capital murder. Rape. Abuse of a corpse. Multiple aggravated homicides. The sentencing. Death. But even then, Clinton didn't go quietly. He appealed. Tried to play the system one last time. Filed motions. Fought his sentence. And in 2022, the Ohio Supreme Court had one final chance to decide his fate. Would they uphold it? Would they give him one more lifeline? The answer was no. The court upheld his convictions and his sentence, calling the evidence overwhelming and his crimes vile, calculated, and cold-blooded. The death penalty would stand. But the scars Clinton left behind, those don't disappear with a verdict. Because this wasn't just a story of murder. It was a story of failure. Of a justice system that missed the warning signs. Of a killer who had already been caught once. And was still given another chance. And that chance cost 3 lives. But there's still more. Because what Curtis Clinton did before prison may not be the whole story. There are whispers, unconfirmed reports, and questions that still don't have answers. What if Misty and Heather weren't his only victims? We're going to explore that next. Because when you start digging into the past of a man like this, you never know what you'll find buried just beneath the surface. Stay with me. If you watched till here, please give a like to this video and do complete our 1,000 subscribers. Thank you. What if I told you that the truth about Curtis Clinton might not stop at Heather Jackson? What if, beneath the surface of this triple homicide, there are darker layers waiting to be uncovered? Because this isn't just the story of a brutal murder. This is the story of a man whose past raises more questions than answers. Questions that have haunted investigators. Questions that have yet to be fully answered. Let's rewind, back before Clinton ever encountered Heather Jackson. Before he murdered Misty Keckler and faced the prison sentence that almost stopped him. There were rumors. Disturbing whispers. And while not all of them can be confirmed, many of them have never been fully investigated. Some believe that Curtis Clinton didn't just have a pattern of violence. That he had victims who never came forward. Victims whose stories never reached the courtroom. Victims whose silence may have cost other lives. Take, for example, the rumors that surfaced after his arrest for the Sandusky triple homicide. People began to wonder, could Clinton have been involved in other unsolved disappearances? Could there be other women out there, like Misty and Heather, who suffered from his rage, only their stories were never told? One name in particular began to resurface. Jessica Lee Davis. Jessica was a young woman who, by all accounts, vanished without a trace in 2001, just a few years before Clinton was sent to prison. She was 23 years old. She had been dating a man she thought she could trust. A man who might have been too dangerous to ever let into her life. Jessica's disappearance, as chilling as it was, never seemed to attract the kind of attention it deserved. But in the aftermath of Clinton's arrest for the murders of Heather and her children, people began to ask questions. Did he have a hand in Jessica's disappearance? Was she just another victim of Clinton's predatory nature? The timeline lines up eerily. Curtis Clinton was out on parole in 2001, living in the same area where Jessica was last seen. And while there was no hard evidence to connect him to her case, the suspicion was enough to raise alarms. But here's where the story takes an even darker turn. Curtis Clinton was known to be in the company of women who disappeared under suspicious circumstances. Was this part of a pattern? Was Heather Jackson and her children just the final chapter in a long list of horrific crimes that had never been fully discovered? Because while investigators focused on his past, and rightfully so, they never managed to dig deep enough into his entire history. You see, Curtis Clinton was careful. He was methodical. He knew how to cover his tracks. He was always one step ahead of those who sought to uncover the truth. And this is where the most chilling part of the story comes to light. He had an uncanny ability to keep his dark secrets hidden. It's been speculated that Clinton may have been involved in several violent encounters, yet he left no clear evidence behind. He would charm his way into the lives of his victims, win their trust, then, when their guard was down, he struck. But that's not the only shocking revelation. Clinton wasn't a loner. In fact, he had a network of people who helped him keep his secrets. It's been suggested that there were those around him, people who knew what he was capable of, yet they remained silent. This begs the question, how much did the people in his life really know? How far did the web of deception stretch? One thing's clear, the deeper you dig into Clinton's past, the more unsettling connections start to surface. But even if we were to assume that Jessica Lee Davis was the only other victim who could be linked to Clinton, it still doesn't explain why he did it. What drove him to murder again, after getting out of prison for the first time? What kind of mental state was Curtis Clinton in when he found Heather and her children? There are some who believe that Clinton had been harboring a deep resentment for women. They think that his violent outbursts were rooted in an ingrained hatred, perhaps dating back to his childhood. But there's no way to know for sure. What we do know is this. Curtis Clinton had a complete disregard for human life. He took what he wanted. And he used manipulation, control, and violence to maintain power over those he targeted. But let's pause for a moment, because there's another angle that doesn't get talked about enough. What about the children? What about the innocent lives that were taken? When police found them, the children's bodies were positioned in a way that suggested Clinton had not only murdered them, but had actively staged the scene. He wanted to make a statement. But what was that statement? Was it about revenge? Was it about control? Or was it about something far darker, a desire to silence a family forever? The chilling reality of Clinton's actions lies in the fact that he didn't just kill Heather. He killed her children. In the most brutal way possible. And this is where the story gets even more unsettling. Because for Clinton, murder wasn't just an act of rage, it was a calculated effort to remove anyone who could threaten his grip on power. What if he knew that Heather had planned to expose him? What if she'd started to suspect who he truly was, who he'd been in his past? And if Heather had ever spoken up, if she had ever told someone what she knew, would she still be alive today? But here's the thing. The story doesn't end with the conviction. Even though Curtis Clinton is now behind bars, the haunting questions linger. What will happen next? Who else might be connected to the web of his crimes? And will the full extent of his evil ever come to light? Stick with me, because the journey through Curtis Clinton's life is far from over. But as we piece together this tragic puzzle, we have to ask ourselves, what happens when justice is served, but it still doesn't feel like enough? Curtis Clinton may have been convicted, but the aftershocks of his brutal actions have rippled far beyond the confines of a prison cell. The truth, the real truth, of what drove him to kill that fateful night remains buried beneath layers of deception, manipulation, and unspeakable violence. And that, perhaps, is the most chilling thing of all. Even behind bars, Clinton still holds the key to a story we may never fully understand. For the surviving family members, for the people who loved Heather Jackson and her children, the closure they seek may never truly come. But there's one thing we cannot ignore: there's always more to a story like this than what meets the eye. Think about it, if Clinton had been so careful with his violence before, so meticulous in how he played his games with those around him, how much more did he hide? Could there be other victims? Could there be more people who've never stepped forward, who never had the chance to tell their stories? And, perhaps more disturbingly, what if there are more pieces of Clinton's history that haven't been uncovered yet? What if this tragic event wasn't just the culmination of his madness, but the final act in a long, twisted game? We know that Clinton served time for a previous crime, a violent act that set the stage for the murders of Heather and her children, but there's something unsettling about how easily he slipped under the radar. How did he manage to convince those around him that he was someone else entirely? His history with women is especially troubling. There were whispers, murmurs among those who knew him, about his troubling relationships with women. He didn't just have a history of violence, he had a pattern of grooming, of manipulating those around him into believing that he was harmless, that he was someone they could trust. There's a deeper layer to this story, one that hasn't been fully explored. Could Clinton's manipulation have gone beyond the women he killed? Could there be others who, perhaps, were lucky enough to escape his grasp, but still carry the scars of their encounters with him? The thing is, Clinton's conviction doesn't erase the possibility that there were more victims whose names we'll never know. His propensity for keeping things hidden, for covering his tracks, suggests that there's far more to uncover about his dark legacy. But it's not just the victims that are left to wonder. It's the community, the people who lived alongside Clinton in Sandusky, Ohio, who never suspected the monster lurking in their midst. For them, the question isn't why Clinton did it, it's how he managed to blend in so seamlessly. He wasn't a ghost. He wasn't some stranger in the night. He was a man living among them, walking the streets, hiding in plain sight. What does that say about the way we look at the people around us? What does it mean when someone can be so normal, yet harbor such darkness within? The community is still grappling with those questions, trying to piece together the man they thought they knew, and the monster he truly was. But as we dive deeper into Clinton's history, we must also ask, what was he planning? Was this murder the culmination of a long-standing rage, or was there something else? Could there have been a plan behind it all? A larger scheme that we'll never fully understand? There are theories. There are rumors. But nothing is concrete. Yet, one thing is certain, the aftershocks of this tragedy continue to shake the foundations of Sandusky, Ohio. Families remain torn apart, with grief echoing through every corner of the town. Heather's family, her friends, are still struggling to reconcile with the fact that their loved ones were brutally taken from them, leaving behind nothing but the cold, unyielding question of why. And, disturbingly, they have to live with the reality that Curtis Clinton isn't the only person capable of such brutality. There are others like him. Others out there, hiding in plain sight. And while Clinton may sit in prison, the truth about his full history, and the true extent of his violence, may never come to light. Because in a case like this, justice doesn't just end with a conviction. It leaves a void, one that no amount of prison time can ever fill. What's more, Clinton's trial, as conclusive as it seemed, didn't resolve the deeper questions that hang over this case. The community remains in the dark about just how far Clinton's reach really went. The court was only able to prosecute what was visible, but the rest, everything that remains hidden, has become the mystery that haunts the survivors, the families, and everyone who ever crossed paths with him. There's one final thing that keeps the public watching, waiting for something more. Curtis Clinton is serving a life sentence for his crimes. But even in prison, he is no stranger to conflict. He's been involved in violent altercations, even within the confines of a maximum security facility. The violent nature that led him to take 3 innocent lives didn't just disappear with his conviction. But just how long can a man like him stay hidden behind the bars of justice? This isn't over. And as the investigation continues to unravel, one thing remains clear: Curtis Clinton may have been the monster in the story, but the true extent of his darkness has yet to be fully uncovered. The case isn't closed. Not by a long shot. As the reality of Heather Jackson's death settled in, the questions kept growing. They gnawed at the very fabric of Sandusky, at the lives of the people who thought they knew Curtis Clinton. How could they have missed the signs? Was he really the quiet, unassuming man he appeared to be, or was there something far darker lurking beneath the surface? And if there was something off about him, why didn't anyone act on it? For a town like Sandusky, a place where people knew each other's names, where life moved with a kind of rhythm that felt predictable, it was impossible to comprehend how such a tragedy could unfold right under their noses. The first few weeks after the murders felt like a blur, a period of disbelief. Neighbors spoke in hushed tones, struggling to reconcile the man they knew, the man they passed every day in the streets, with the monster who'd taken the lives of 3 innocent people. The media coverage poured in from all corners of the country, painting the picture of a cold-blooded killer, but for those who lived closest to him, the story was far more complicated. Was Curtis Clinton always capable of this kind of violence? Could anyone have seen the warning signs? Or was he simply too good at hiding in plain sight? It wasn't just the brutality of the crime that shook Sandusky, it was the normalcy that Clinton managed to project. He blended in. He became part of the daily landscape, like a fixture. No one suspected him. No one could see what was coming. And that thought terrified the community. If Clinton could be so close to home, so deeply embedded in the lives of those around him, who else was hiding behind the same mask? What other seemingly harmless faces could be lurking in the background, living lives of quiet desperation, waiting for their own moment to lash out? The uncertainty ate away at the town. The lingering question echoed in every conversation: how do you protect yourself from someone who hides their true nature so well? How do you spot the warning signs when the man next door, the person you waved to at the grocery store, is capable of unimaginable violence? In the days following the crime, Clinton's past began to surface. Layers of his history, some known to a few, some kept hidden, started to unravel. He had a reputation, but not for the type of violence that would make a town suspicious. No, it was his charm. His ability to connect with people, to make them feel comfortable, to put them at ease. He wasn't an outcast. He wasn't an obvious danger. He was someone's neighbor, someone's coworker, someone's friend. And as the details of his previous crimes emerged, a cold realization began to settle in: Clinton's history was more complicated than anyone had known. Before Heather and her children, he had been arrested for other violent offenses, but he had managed to escape the full consequences of his actions. There were victims before, but their stories never made it into the spotlight. Their voices were drowned out by the noise of a system that allowed him to slip through the cracks. So, what really led him to kill that night? What went through his mind as he stood in that house with Heather and her children? What drove him to take their lives in such a brutal, senseless way? The police weren't just looking at Clinton's actions, they were now combing through every piece of his history. Every moment that could offer a glimpse into his twisted psyche. But the answers weren't coming easily. Clinton remained tight-lipped, offering nothing to the investigators. No motive. No explanation. Just silence. And as the investigation dragged on, another horrifying thought began to surface. What if this wasn't the first time? What if there were other victims? What if Heather and her children were just the most recent casualties in a long, dark history? The possibility that Clinton had been involved in other crimes that were never connected to him, left a chilling sense of dread hanging over the investigation. Could the full extent of his violence ever truly be known? The families of Heather and her children were left reeling, struggling to understand how their loved ones could be taken so violently, so suddenly. There were no answers, just a void where they should have been. The grief was unbearable, but the unanswered questions, the not knowing, made it even worse. And then, there were the families of the people who had known Clinton. They too were left trying to make sense of the man they had once trusted. The man who had lived among them, who had been accepted into their lives, was he capable of the horrors that had just been revealed? How did Clinton slip through the cracks of the system for so long? What allowed him to escape the punishment for his previous offenses? Why was he able to convince everyone around him that he was just another ordinary man, when in reality, he was a ticking time bomb? The ripple effects of his crimes didn't just affect the victims. They extended far beyond that. For those closest to Clinton, for the friends and neighbors who thought they knew him, the betrayal was deep. They had all been deceived, and the shock of that revelation left a scar that would never fade. And then there were the survivors, the people who had been touched by Clinton's actions in the most intimate ways. Those who were left behind, struggling to understand what had happened, and why it had happened to them. The community around them, in many ways, had been altered forever. The echoes of this crime would resonate long after Clinton's trial was over. But even as the investigation pressed forward, even as Clinton's future was secured behind bars, one thing was undeniable: the monster who had destroyed so many lives had left an indelible mark. His actions would never be forgotten. The search for answers continued. The town of Sandusky would never be the same. Behind closed doors, in the quiet corners of everyday neighborhoods, horrors unfold that most never hear about, until it's far too late. If this story left you stunned, you're not alone. Don't stop here. Hit that subscribe button to complete our first 1,000 subscribers. Like this video to help others see it. And tell us in the comments, what shocked you the most? In the next video, we're diving into a case even more shocking, chilling, and baffling. Stay tuned. Thank you.